um, for everyone here, what we thought we'd do to begin with is start with a brief overview of key terms and some of the initial questions that we got. We're going to answer with a brief slide presentation. This isn't intended to be the entirety of the coffees and questions. It's just meant to be an opening from us, just to give everybody a sort of solid ground to start from. And probably somewhere we can begin to start chatting about different network infrastructure options, ways in which we can build networks, and some of the best practices for delivering good quality optical network solutions with protection, without protection, how it needs to be built in order to best serve the needs of the enterprise or carrier network. So we'll start with the slideshow. Did you want to launch it, Doug? Again, this is just an opening gambit. This is something that we can start talking from. The intent here is to not be be vendor agnostic. Our name's on these slides. We used our standard corporate slide deck, and going forward, we're going to try and keep this as vendor agnostic as possible, even when we're discussing different network solutions, even if it's a Ciena specific or Cisco specific. We're going to keep it fairly blank because we don't want this to become some sort of sales driven conversation topic. This is entirely meant to help people discuss, learn more about different networking options, and it's meant to be a way in which we can sort of give back at the same time that we're all working from home. There's not a lot of people we can sell to. There's not a lot of devices we can ship out. So it's better just to open up the doors and let people talk to our people and learn more about it. There's been a quick chat message here from Ron. We did send out a copy of the slide deck, but we'll make sure that you definitely get a copy of it if you can't see it right now. So we'll go into this. Sorry, I've got pop-ups popping up on my screen right in front of me, which is sort of annoying. This is also the first time we've used this medium to reach out and talk to people. So this is in a group session. This is the first time we've done this. So if we make any mistakes, we fluff off a bit, please forgive us. We're experimenting, trying this new as well. So we'll go from there. I wasn't expecting my screen to fill up with pop-ups the way it did. So this is the start of Coffee and Chat. The idea, like I said, was to give everyone a forum where they could discuss, share ideas, share stories, be non-salesy, and just a general good resource for everybody to know that you can always contact us if you have questions and you just want to learn more about a specific networking option. We're always available. So it's a good way for us to stay networked as well. So we enjoy doing that. So we'll move into the next part of the slide. Optical networking basics. Not a lot to discuss here. I mean, we basically start at the end user. We hit the metro networks where we have our broadband networks, we have our ISPs, we have our other network carriers, and from the metro we go long haul, usually back to some either backhaul network or to between cities for large enterprise clients. So in our world, metro and long haul are sort of the biggest areas that we look at. We also look at what we call the middle mile, and middle mile's got different definitions depending on who you talk to. But from our point of view, it's sort of the distance between, say, a hub point for a 5G network back to the central office. It's the difference between a data center to an edge network. It's that middle section. It's not the last mile. It's just that middle section that's how we discuss and term it.
And last mile optical networking is a totally different subject that we're not really touching on.
Exactly. That's why we get into sort of the GPONs and stuff like that. We don't really go there. So what we do talk about, the terminology that we're going to use and is used commonly in the market right now is on this slide here. So we talk about the client port, This is the port where the customer connects their equipment. And I don't want to just read the slides. You can see those typically used for short reach or long reach optics. The line port is the port that exits the equipment. So this is your CWDM or your DWDM, and as is noted here, usually a tunable transceiver. Trunks are similar to the line, but they service the extra tag added to the frame. Coarse wave division multiplexing is one of the key terms that we all hear about. It's a system of multiplexing multiple different light frequencies onto a single fiber. We can do up to 18, or everyone does up to 18 circuits. Can be provided using channel spaced 20 nanometers apart, and then we've also provided the nanometer distances that are covered. Dense wave division multiplexing is the most common. It's a system of multiplexing, again, different light frequencies onto the single fiber. And what's important about both of these is the amount of data that can be put onto a single fiber pair that allows you to connect between your metro or your long haul networks. We have the transponder, which is what transforms the data stream to enable it to be transported over a different medium. Alien wave, which is the one that I could never really fully understand when I first got into this side of the industry. I assumed it was a small alien with a UFO flying around, but it turns out I was wrong about that. But it's the ability to have one manufacturer's equipment carried over a different manufacturer's DWM system. So it's sort of separating, and Doug, you may want to correct me if I'm wrong about this, but separating a spectrum of light and running it through a different piece of equipment.
Well, typically these sorts of equipment are made by a specific manufacturer, and it's a solution, that includes all the end-to-end and everything else. And there are times when someone has existing services, existing networks that are from a different manufacturer. And when a manufacturer provides the solution where other manufacturers' equipment can ride on their network, it's considered more an alien wave, because there are possibly certain management things, statistics that they can't see because they're very specific to manufacturer Y. And as manufacturer X, you don't get to see some of the secret sauce that manufacturer Y does to a signal to get it working on the network properly. So it's considered an alien wave if you can't, do specific things, because you don't fully control that service.
And see, I'm still no further ahead on that one. Which is why we have these sessions, so we can learn as well.
It's all us foreigners, basically.
Yeah, that's the alien in here. We also have lit and dark services. Lit services are fiber that's already pre-lit by the carrier that's providing the connection. And then we have dark fiber, which has no light on it at the moment. So we have a lot of European networks that are purely dark fiber networks. And so it's interesting that, how you can build or sort of patch together a network of lit and dark fiber services together to create more network functionality and extensions. Some of the other areas that I found really fascinating when I got into the optical side of the data networks was the link budget. I'd never really put a lot of thought into this before. And it was something that during a customer meeting we discussed, and I realized how fascinating the area is understanding how far your light can travel before it starts losing its power, and before it has to be amplified, and what loss you get from adding things like amplifiers. And we'll go into more detail about that, because I'm certainly not the expert on any of this. I'm just the pretty face to introduce you all. OSNR is also very interesting. It's the difference in the signal strength between actual transmission and the signal when it's received, and OTDR, where we can use software or equipment to determine exactly where in the fiber path there is a problem or a loss of power, which is also very cool. Before I hand this over to Doug and let him do more of a technical explanation of what we're looking at, I'll briefly go over some of the network topologies that we typically involved in. We have point-to-point, which is fairly simple A to Z networks. We have ring topologies, which are very common amongst a lot of the metro providers. Star networks, which are quite frequently used between campuses, multi-building enterprise clients, and again, larger network providers. Mesh networks, which is where the larger providers are. Mesh networks give you a much more resilience to your network, because you can have the data travel between multiple different paths across the same network. So data from A to E in the diagram could go via D, B, or A. It doesn't really matter. If the link between D and E goes down, the data could go from C to D to A to E. So it provides much more resilience, and that's something that we're seeing a lot of requests for as well, is greater resiliency and path protection. So it's important stuff to know. And that drop in its actual meaning is where you can separate some of the signal to create a new drop on the network without interfering with the entire fiber run. So we're not splicing the cable, adding a new device in there to add a new drop. We're just simply taking some of the frequency and we're applying it to a new link directly off the A to B point-to-point network. And add drops are very cool feature, a very interesting way to add services, but it's also something that needs to be considered properly in order to ensure that you're addressing your link budget, that you got the right amplification, that you're not adjusting the signal for the rest of the traffic going from A to B. So again, Doug can go into more detail about that in the following slides, and we can talk about it and chat about it afterwards as well as necessary. So at this point, what I'm going to do is hand the conversation over to Doug, and let Doug be more infinitely wisdom than me.
Well, just to bring up a couple of usage points of this, I believe that Stacey has control of the Zoom session with who can do what, and everyone at the moment, I believe, is muted, and we will unmute people, of course, at the end. But if you do have any questions anywhere along the way, please don't hesitate to hit the chat button session, which you should have there in Zoom. And I believe that we have Perola Cylinder on the call, who's our sales manager. He is going to be monitoring the chat sessions, and if anything comes up, he will buzz me and let me know to possibly stop and go there. I'll also, of course, be monitoring the chat myself as much as I can. And, you know, please don't hesitate during the course of these slides to ping me a question. I'm going to try and keep this down to 20 minutes or so. And then we can chat afterwards.
Also, one of the things that we should do is probably introduce ourselves, but we'll do this at the end of the slides. We'll do a proper introduction so that everyone knows who we are, where we came from. And
yes, I'm Doug Hogg. I'm the senior sales engineer with XKL, and I've been in this industry now for more than half my life, way too long. And been around some of the optical networking technologies ever since the 1980s, when some of the first fiber optic networks were being used in their massive, like 20-kilometer length of service. So, it's come a long way since then. So as Gavin mentioned, the optical budget is one of the most important things when we're dealing with optical networking of any distance. A signal is transmitted. There's a laser at one end of an optical path, and there's a receiver at the other end. And when the light goes down the optical fiber, the glass isn't perfect. So it slowly gets attenuated. There's loss as it goes along the fiber. The most common longer haul optics that are in the market today, they're quite often known as ZR optics. And these typically have a capability of going about 80 kilometers because fiber has a certain amount of loss per kilometer. Typically nowadays it's 0.2 to 0.25 dB or decibels per kilometer. And you know, with the nominal power that these lasers send out, which is about 0 dBm, if you don't remember all your old wave things, it's, you know, reference to 1 watt of power basically going out at 0. And 1 milliwatt. God, even I've forgotten these. But 80 kilometers later, the receiver is seeing the signal now at its minimum. And if you try and add too much more fiber, then the signal can't be identified by the receiver. So the optical budget is the difference between what we transmit at one end and what is the minimum receive that we can see at the other end. If you want to go further, then we have to boost up the signal. Now, we kind of have a generalization of optical networks, and these numbers and distances can be argued by many people, but what we kind of look at is, you hear all this, the nomenclature about, you know, there's metro networks, there's long haul networks, and there's ultra long haul networks. Now with the ultra long haul, that's where we're talking about the big fibers, the submarine fibers between, you know, Los Angeles and Hawaii, or even, you know, across to Asia, or across the Atlantic, from Europe to North America. Of course, these are much longer, much further than 80 kilometers. So yes, there's lots of amplification. There's a lot of different factors that go into making these networks work. A lot of engineering, a lot of math. Once you get beyond the metro network of that kind of 50 kilometers, then working with, you know, major network, optical networking equipment, and running lots of different DWDM, CWDM type solutions across with these normal ZR optics. Outside the metro, you've got to add more equipment, and you've got to understand all of these, all of the other factors such as dispersion and noise, the optical signal to noise ratio. These need to be addressed and understood to ensure that you've got these error-free services. It gets going. Sorry, you might. I don't know if you guys can hear the little buzzing of my phone whenever I get these messages. And what do we mean by, you know, taking that metro network? Well, typically with these networks now, we don't want to just have one service going down a fiber optic cable between 2 buildings, between 2 cities, between 2 countries. That's wasteful, and actually the fiber optic cable still costs a lot of money, and having a piece of fiber put into the ground or hung across power poles between 2 buildings that in a campus might not cost very much, but to run a cable between New York and London is a very, very, very expensive thing. So of course you want to put as many signals down a cable as you can, and multiplexing, or converting multiple different signals into different wavelengths of light, so they run on a different frequency, and adding them all into a single piece of fiber optic cable is multiplexing. At the other end, you've got to split them back out again, so you demultiplex them. Now, this is something that, was it the 1990s, I think, when they first came up with some really good muxing and demuxing. Everyone recognized the fact that a standard must be introduced to enable all the different manufacturers to work with each other. So the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, created a standardized frequency grid of what frequencies of light would be used for all the different channels. And actually, if I skip to the, there's a couple more further on, I could show you where you see that you have your set frequency of light for a channel, and then you have the distance between the next channel, so the spacing. And initially, it used to be 100 gigahertz of wavelength spacing, which in the standard bandwidth of a fiber optic cable, of the older cables, would give you, there were 73 channels actually assigned in the grid, but realistically with the technologies that we had, there's really only about 48 to 50 channels that are viable to work with the amplifiers and things. So initially in the old days, at 10 gigabits per channel, which is what they started out being able to pretty much run down there, that was, you know, at total like a 400 to 500 gigabits per fiber optic cable. In today's technologies, in that 100 gigahertz spacing, you can actually get more than 400 gigabits if you're using, you know, proprietary optical devices from certain vendors. But for common, you know, off-the-shelf purchasable optics to use, you can run 400 gigabits per 100 gigabit space channel quite effectively at lowish cost. When I say lowish, it's still not exactly free, but you know, it has gone from that factor of 10 gigabits per channel now to 400 gigabits per channel. As they went, of course, to get more signals down the same fiber, because that fiber can cost literally hundreds of millions of dollars to put in place, over time they reduced the spacing between those channels, so they can double the number of wavelength circuits you can put down a piece of fiber. Today, of course, with the narrower spacing, you can't have as wide a band of data go down. So the 50 gigahertz spacing nowadays can run 200 gigabits per channel. But very commonly you see the 50 gigahertz spacing running 100 gigabit services. So 96 100 gigabit services down one piece of fiber is a very common solution today. 25 gigahertz we don't see as often, but you could run 192 channels or more. And there's a newer one as well called FlexGrid, which is where equipment can go on to a piece of fiber and just pick and choose the spacing it has and allocate, you know, a range of frequencies for a particular service, instead of it being just, you know, allocated at exactly 100 gigahertz chunks. It can have one service that runs 100 gigahertz and is 400 gigabit, and then next to it or close to it, just assign just a 25 gigahertz space for a 40 gig channel. Again, yeah, it's newer. It isn't truly standard because you've got to have a bit more complexity in your muxes and demuxes to do that flex grid servicing, but it is something to think about. Now, just wondered if anyone had any, do we want to have comments after a slide? Because I only have, you know, I believe six real slides to go through, so I can try and I'll just run through them quick, and if you can think about something, write it down, or we can talk about it later.
Absolutely. Please feel free to write questions. We've had a couple submitted privately, but if you want to submit them publicly, that'd be great, so everyone has a chance to see the questions.
Yeah, I mean, as Gavin mentioned, this is our first time at doing this, so I don't know how fast I'm going, how slow I'm going. Everyone's different out there. Amplifiers, as I said before, earlier on with the budget, right? A typical ZR optic can only send enough signal that can go down a typical fiber about 80 kilometers. Now, if we want to go further than that, say in the diagram below, I show 160 kilometer circuit. So someone's had the capacity to get a piece of fiber optic cable 160 kilometers long to link 160K. Is that Portland to Seattle? Maybe a bit further, but we need to amplify it. So what we have to do for the amplification side of things is, within the optical budget, before we get the signal gets down to that minimum receive level, we need to re-amplify the signal. So in this case, at 80 kilometers, we actually inserted in the fiber cable an active amplifier. It needs to be powered, so there's going to be some little hut somewhere on the side of the road where this box is inserted. But it boosts the signal back up, and at the far end, the signal's getting pretty weak, so we can actually put a preamplifier before the receiver and just give that signal a bit of a boost up so the receiver's happy that it's not trying to think too hard about how good the signal is. And these amplifiers, there's two main types of amplifiers used, and if you've ever looked at buying any sort of optical networking equipment, any equipment, you'll probably have seen the message about the EDFA. EDFA is one of those two amplifiers, and it's the erbium doped fiber amplifier. These devices can pretty much boost up to 30 dB of signal boost. The common ones you see today, are going to be like 12 dB boost, 20 dB boost, 27 dB boost, 23. The more you want to boost up, of course, the higher power that it needs to work. Now, everyone has to remember that power also includes heat, so there's a whole bunch of things. Wide versus narrow spectrum range. Okay, I'll get to that one in a second, Aaron. I just noticed the note there. Now, the one thing about the EDFA is the EDFA is designed to only boost the optical signals that are in a specific range of frequencies. I hadn't gone over just before the fact that in the ITU grid, the way an optical fiber works, there are certain frequencies that it doesn't like to pass. So there are frequency ranges. I haven't got a diagram, unfortunately, with the different band ranges and the frequencies that show the low band at 850 nanometers, which is only good for like 20 or 30 meters. Then you've got the, 200 meters, sort of thing, very, very short range. Then there's the standard stuff that you might see in your LAN at work with optics between two switches. And that's at about 1310 nanometers. For the long haul solutions to get the 80 kilometers, the typical band is called the C band. Now, there is another band above the C band, the L band. I haven't got the sheet with it. I am just trying to look here. I think yeah, I've got to find the exact frequency ranges. I apologize, I don't have it right at the tips. Yeah, okay, there's the CDPMD, okay, yeah. The C band, EDFAs will work with, are typically designed to work in the C band or in the L band, either one of them. So as an amplifier, they are only amplifying a specific range of frequencies. Now the other amplifier, I'm getting a little bit distracted here with the notes and things. The Raman amplifier is actually named after the the scientist who worked out all about the spectral scattering effect of combining different signals in a medium, because it's not just an optical thing, and how the scattering effect of other signals can stimulate the energy in in another signal. This whole amplification thing is in itself a chalk and talk type thing to go through how these amplifiers work. But the end result is EDFAs can give a much higher boost signal, but EDFAs can be noisy. They actually introduce noise, and they affect the OSNR, which we'll get to next. The Raman amplifier doesn't give as much boost, but it's a much cleaner method of amplifying, because it doesn't introduce another type of fiber optic cable in the middle of it, and do the optical things that add that spurious noise. So we don't have to worry about the noise ratio. Now, these amplifiers, of course, can be used at the beginning or at the end of any service, and they're typically added into the Mux Demux. You normally will get a box set of equipment that does all of these things all at the same time. Now, the other problem that we have to overcome when working with optics, especially over any longer distance, is just the physics of glass and optical transmission. And there's two forms of dispersion that we're always having to work with. There's chromatic dispersion, or the dispersion of the different colors of light, and there's polarization dispersion, where the fiber cable is not perfectly round, and sometimes the different phases of light, the polarization of the light, they have different effects over distance. Now, for both the optical frequency and the polarization of a light signal going down a piece of fiber, they actually run at different speeds. So the circuit that's running on the red channel, if we simplify it to the colors of the rainbow, the red channel versus the purple channel, the red channel actually runs just microscopically faster than the blue. So if they're all sent at the same time from point A, by the time they get to the end at point Z, there's actually, it can be a few picoseconds of difference in timing between those two. And, it was 0 picoseconds that transmitted. It's, it can be a few picoseconds or more at the end point. So we have to overcome that. And the same with the polarization. The way that with the higher speed circuits, the 100 gig and beyond, the modulation techniques, we're actually using, the different phases of light. And over distance, those phases can actually sort of slip. One phase could be fractionally faster than the other. And so when you're trying to run a coding modulation scheme using different polarizations and things, you don't want those getting out of sync at the distance. So what we end up having to do is use dispersion compensation. And that's basically just a device that takes that and introduces in an inverse of what occurs on the fiber. That means that a dispersion compensation module is built for a distance, right? You're overcoming these dispersion problems that occur over a certain amount of distance. So you compensate for that amount of distance. So it's actually a distance, precisely a distance specific device. Now this can be, you buy it to fit a specific length of fiber that you're compensating, or you have dispersion compensation modules that are tunable. Everything nowadays, they build things now with knobs, so you can correct them to exactly what you need. The worst one, that is something that is very, very hard to overcome, is noise. And the way that we overcome noise is to just prevent it. It's the only way. You have to try to get rid of as much noise as you can without actually having to regenerate the signal, and basically terminate the signal, totally process the whole signal and regenerate it totally clean coming out the other side, which is the much more expensive and harder way of fixing noise. So the noise ratio is, excuse me, like in any form of technology, it's a difference between what you want to hear and all of the stuff that can be on the line that you don't want to hear. If the noise is kept to a minimum, then your receiver can see just the signal that it wants to see and can identify what is the actual signal it's supposed to receive and pass it on out through the client to the other side. Now, the longer a service is built for, the further the distance, and the more equipment that occurs at the different points along the way, the more noise that can be introduced. This is something that in the metro we don't normally worry about, because the 50-kilometer metro services, dispersion is actually another thing. That in those metro type services, it's not really enough distance for noise and for dispersion to become an issue with the transceivers and the transmitters and the receivers, the optical equipment. Noise is something that is, this noise, when designing a service and a network, this is something that we actually go through and have to work on a mathematical formula with all of the different equipment, the transmit receive levels, the fiber optic cable, and the quality and what's going on there. This is something that can be calculated. If there's an EDFA in there and things, we have to allow for noise, and we have to work through all of the different conditions. But this is where you quite often hear the term optical engineering. And for the very long haul, the long haul and the ultra long haul networks, optical engineering is something that has to be done on paper before you can confirm exactly what the equipment that you require gets there. Now, forward error correction, I just noticed that one. Is forward error correction applied to layer 1 fiber optic transmission? Yes, it is for some technologies. Now, I mentioned before about the faster and faster with the 100 gigabits, 200, 400. Now you hear about vendors out there with 800 gigabit optical circuits. They're using coherent modulation technologies. And typically, yes, coherent services do use forward error correction. And it is absolutely a whole, almost a good half hour's chat about the different types of coherent technologies and how it's evolved, how it works. Because coherent services is one part of the industry where it's not exactly a perfect standard. And some manufacturers have developed their own, they're called DSPs, digital signal processors that go into the equipment to modulate the signal, to put all the coding and things, and to work with forward error correction. Most of these technologies are absolutely vendor specific, not an international standard. So there are times when you have to be careful if you're buying certain optics that have this sort of FEC, forward error correction and modulation. Make sure that they actually will talk to each other. The last, and this is the last technical one, is the OTDR. OTDR being, it's just a test that's run on a piece of fiber. What this is doing is actually sending a piece of light down a dark fiber. It's a tester, and it just lets you to see the optical characteristics of a piece of fiber cable. It creates a report, and you'll often hear people ask, have they got an OTDR report on the fiber link? With this report, you can see everything that goes on that bit of fiber and see exactly how long the fiber is, because it works by sending out a piece of light and knowing that at any point on a fiber cable where there's an issue of any sort, up to the end where the piece of glass cuts off, the light's going to reflect back at any problem, whatever it might be. Now, in this case here, shown on the screen, this is an optical OTDR report on a piece of fiber that can see 4 events, the 4th event being the end. And that's seen at a distance of 101 kilometers. Now, it can be shown in feet as well. Don't worry, it's not always metric. This using specific frequencies, and this was a test done at 1550 nanometers at the very top of the little box there. This test sends it out, and it's time domain reflectometer. So it knows that when it sends out a specific pulse of light, that a reflection, the time it takes for the reflection to come back, can be calculated of how far that piece of light went. This fiber actually was made up of 4 sections of fiber that were probably 25 kilometers long. And these, they were fusion spliced to make 100 kilometer long piece of fiber. And you can see that there's little points at points 1, 2, and 3 at 25, 50, and 76, were where this 4 pieces were linked together. And every time you have a fusion splice, it's never perfect. There's always a little bit of loss in there of 0.25 dB. So whenever you're working on a new service with any optical network group, you probably want to make sure you're getting this OTDR report to know what the quality of the fiber is when you start, because anything can happen. We've probably all heard of the stories of blade fade, and some tractor driver or something digging a hole and digging up the fiber, or if it's an overhead fiber, a car or a truck taking out a power pole that breaks the fiber off the pole. And these are events that can occur, and yes, suddenly the you shoot the OTDR, and that end point is no longer 101 kilometers, but it's 37 or whatever kilometers. And that's all the technical. There are lots of other technical issues and things to think about with the network. Now, that loss at a splice, there's a negative loss at a splice shown. Yes. Does this question ever make sense? Negative loss. It shows negative. It's just the nature of the OTDR, that when the reflection comes back, it's not truly amplified. I mean, it doesn't get amplified. It's just the nature of the light signal is seen as just after, it's not a pure science. And there are times an OTDR does give that negative, or it looks like amplification at a certain point down there. I'm not the expert of OTDRs. I've used them a few times in my life, but I don't know exactly why. But it's not, it shows up as a negative loss. It is actually realistically a positive loss because of the way the light reflection comes back in after 75 kilometers. The OTDR thinks it's actually stronger, or it can see that it's amplifying, but it's not. It's still a loss, and it's still added to the overall loss of the main signal. You also, Ron actually asked a question in there about 800 gigahertz optical transmission. on a dark fiber. That's something that's come out in the last year or so, and I mentioned that there's the DSPs and things. With optical transmission and the new frequencies and things, they always come out first with the manufacturers of the DSPs, the digital signal processors, and the guys who are actually making the optical components, the transmitters and the receivers and things. Now, they put those onto their circuit boards, and initially, for the first while, year, two, whatever, they're proprietary because, hey, that's their intellectual property. And over time, that sort of technology, which initially starts out on a big integrated circuit, gets reduced down and miniaturized into very much smaller circuits and can be put into a pluggable optic, or a device that's got the transmitter and the receiver in a very small carriage that can be plugged into anyone's device. 800 gigabits is not in any pluggable optics that I know of at the moment, and is unlikely to be for, my guess would be 2 or 3 years. We were trying to be vendor in specific, but at the moment, XKL predominantly is working with the pluggable optics, the stuff that we don't care which manufacturer you want to use. So at the moment, 100 gigabits pluggable optics are common. 200 gigabits optical pluggables from multiple vendors, they're getting pretty common. And the 400 gig is now starting to become mainstream. So 800 gig, you're looking at working with a specific vendor, typically going to be there are lots of them out there. I'm not going to name names. I don't want to name names, but they're the ones who you see in the paper saying, hey, we've just deployed an 800 gigabit link between Atlanta and New York or something. 800 gigabits over the submarine cables between continents is still, the wider the bandwidth on some of these signals, then the shorter the distance that you can go because of OSNR, because of the amplification problems, all of these sorts of things. The amount of noise that can be handled by the equipment definitely gets, it needs to be much further apart for these higher frequencies, because you've got so much, modulation and things going on. It's noise really can hamper it. And on the same piece of fiber where you can run 100 gigabits for 2,000 kilometers with amplification, of course, at different points. At 400 gigabits, you might only be able to go 500 kilometers. So, with technology always getting better and better, and there's new forms of error correction and modulation and all these things, it will improve over time. But, we will, of course, handle 800 gigabits when it becomes cost effective for us. But that's
but we're not going to go vendor specific here. So
yeah.
What I'd like to do is, I think this is a good time. We've spent a little bit longer than I thought we would on the slides. I'd like to sort of hand it over to the floor, let anybody who has any questions or anything that they want to share with us, make those questions out loud.
Yeah, I went.
So
I went 40 instead of 30.
So everyone's unmuted. If anybody's got any additional questions they'd like to ask, let's just start chatting. If you could just quickly say who you are and where you're from, and it all helps us to feel more like family. And on that note, I'm Gavin McMillan. I have about as many years as Doug does, slightly less in telecom. I started in 1988. 87, 88, somewhere in that region. I'm so old, I forget. So I've been building networks. I built networks across Europe, Middle East, Northern Africa for AT&T back in the early 90s, across North America, Gens and Japan, mid-90s, Israel, mid-90s. I've basically been kind of all over the place. I make the joke I've been thrown out of more countries than I've been to, I think. I don't know. So that's a little prehistory of me. We can chat more if anybody wants to know about me, but
Stacey can unmute, I think, everyone.
that everyone should be unmuted, I think. Oh no, they're not. I'm unmuting everybody. Feel free to speak anytime you wish.
Oh, hey, thank you for the presentation. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
I'm new to the layer 1 game, so I'm usually playing way above layer 1. And but given access to dark fiber, it seems to me, I just don't understand everything XKL does, but it seems to me leveraging your dark fiber optic appliances would allow one to build a pretty interesting sort of private on-premise cloud interconnected between data centers. And just trying to get my head around this is pretty amazing.
Thanks. I mean, it is the big thing of understanding it, because there's a lot of people who don't, they hear about these metro networks and things, and one of the questions, and it's a chat topic of its own, is the whole lit service versus dark services thing that's out there. I mean, most customers are not big telcos who can afford to, get all the necessary permits to be able to run a piece of fiber optic cable, dig the trench in the road and build it between two buildings. So you're typically going to be using some other company to get access to the fiber optic connectivity between your two endpoints, wherever they are.
Right.
And then you've got the choice of do you lease dark fiber, or do you have them provide the equipment to give you these services across the country? Again, like I said, that's a whole different subject, and it's a subject that's very difficult to answer simply because that cost of getting access to that fiber optic cable is different in different cities, in different countries. There's sometimes laws about it, and it does come down to, in countries like the US, the competitive nature of a specific city.
So they charge what they please, I guess.
Absolutely. Competition reduces prices, but then you've got other places where the local government, there's plenty of cities in the United States where the county or the city have spent the money and put in fiber optic assets throughout the city or county, and will provide access to that fiber optic cable and allow people to get dark fiber services within a city for a much lower cost than the big telcos or any other for-profit industry may want to charge. So
I'm just curious to find out what is the range in pricing for dark fiber? Are we talking about like $10,000 a month to $50,000 a month, or maybe less than that?
You're talking anywhere from pretty much, it could be $150 a month.
Right.
If you're in the right place. Again,
right.
it's all dependent on who has what.
Right.
But I'm thinking about like down south, a city I have had dealings with, just to let you know, is Clarksville, Tennessee, where the local power company, which is a municipal utility, so it's owned by the town and the rest of it, they deployed fiber to the home basically. And so there's fiber to every building available. And they were looking at at offering dark fiber services for businesses, to connect around the city at extremely low rates when compared to, say, if you asked AT&T or Comcast or someone like that. I
Right.
don't know who the competitors were. I can't say, but that competition, of course, reduced the prices of other things. It's market considerations. So cities can help provide that. Then you've got the technical towns. We are here in the Seattle area, so we have a lot of technology companies. The Bay Area, other cities, and that's where a lot of different fiber optic providers have gone in and spent the money. And there's glass in the ground, as we call it. There's lots of different cables from different people.
Right.
So, with the added competition, then the pricing comes down.
Certainly. Across a lot of Europe, there are multiple different organizations that have sprung into life to cut the pavement and lay fiber in metros, dig and lay fiber across wide area networks. And all these companies are competing against each other to have the best quality, lowest latency, lowest cost, and so you see a lot of cost benefits for owning your own dark fiber in Europe. It's just so much cheaper.
Okay.
And if anybody else has any experience on the cost of fiber, please feel free to butt in and say something as well. But yeah,
unfortunately, I'm here in Canada, and in Canada, everything always cuts against.
Not necessarily. I'm out in Vancouver,
right?
And in Vancouver, as well as Ontario, we've got things like the transit systems that run fiber optic cable along the conduits on all the rail lines.
Right.
That means that we have accessibility to dark fiber across large areas of the Metro Vancouver area, and the same is true within Metro Toronto as well. There's a large amount of dark fiber available that I found that in many instances, the people who are in charge of selling that dark fiber have no idea what they're doing. They don't really, they're transit people. They're not dark fiber people.
Oh, okay.
So they're not really sure how to market, advertise, or sell it. It's in the US, we see similar situations with the utilities. It's not so much that they don't know how to sell it, just that they are so hamstrung by the regulations that they can't sell it, or they have to sell it only to carriers who then sell it to customers. So there are multiple different places you can go to look for fiber that you wouldn't probably necessarily think about.
Oh, okay. So here let's assume just Toronto. In this instance, what are you typically paying for access to dark fiber in the Metro Toronto area?
That I am not sure about.
Okay.
It's been a while since I was involved in that.
Sure. Okay. There seem to be all kinds of fiber optic carriers popping up here, and it's rather surprising. Like Bell is 800-pound gorilla, as is Rogers, and even TELUS coming out from up west, and Shaw, I think too. That might be another one. I'm sort of surprised that there are other smaller competitors. I can't remember the name of the competitor, but something Field, Lightfield, or something like that in Metro Toronto, downtown core anyway.
And that's a thing we see a lot more of in these very much market-oriented methods. And again, this is something that we can discuss in more detail offline. But but yeah, the nature of the market is bandwidth and everything. And heck, this COVID thing has really shown. We work with a lot of ISPs, and everyone they're working from home and things. There's been a huge increase in bandwidth requirements at different times.
Right.
And this is where the market is constantly changing, and more people are trying to get into the market. So there are more and more competitors, and as the competition comes in, that's where we're seeing it's a constant change with the costs of dark fiber, and lit services are the same. They're coming down in price as well.
Okay. Wow.
But it's a market-driven thing.
So I did post questions about reliability. I have heard through previous XKL contact that this equipment's crazy reliable. They're talking 10 years, and they're saying it's truly hitless. Now, I mean, is this still the case? Is this true?
Okay. Without getting into any vendor-specific things,
Sure.
this is reliability in optical networking is another chat session basically, because
Okay.
there's a range of different things, and I won't get into any vendor bashing, but of course you're going to get what you pay for. There's the high-end equipment, there's the lower-end equipment that one uses, extremely robust technology, and other ones maybe a little less robust. Then there's the design of the network. I mean, I mentioned earlier that some digger is known to occasionally cut a fiber cable. So the way you design your whole overall network, as Gavin mentioned, resiliency is something that can be built in. These are all network design questions and above the basics, but yes, there are aspects that we have to look at.
All right. Wow, this is actually amazing. I don't think people understand what you folks really do. This is like extremely disruptive technology.
It's something that people don't get initially, but anyone who's been in telecommunications for a long time, it's anyone who's worked in any form of wave science, physics, and things. It's all basic physics. That just keeps developing, and the stuff that is coming out of the research and development labs of the big telcos and the big optics manufacturers and things. I mean, it's incredible, and it's going to keep getting bigger, faster, stronger, and more expensive. But
can we speak offline?
Absolutely.
With respect to, I would like an opinion or just a conversation about specific fiber optic technology that's in play to be commercialized from a educational institution here in Canada. And I don't know enough about layer 1 to understand what the impact is. So is that something we can have a discussion offline?
It's absolutely an offline discussion that I would love to have.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Do I just contact XKL, the number, and
Gavin will get back in touch with you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. All right, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. It was an enlightening seminar. I mean, for me, I don't play down layer 1. I'm above that, and but I understand.
One of the interesting things about layer 1 and the purity of layer 1, which is sort of what we talk about quite often, and we've got a fellow equipment provider here from Smart Optics as well, who probably discusses the same sort of stuff. But at layer 1, when you're not at layer 2, 3, and above, your network is much more secure because the foundation of your network is sitting in one layer that's not interacting with the other layers. So you're not going to see any of the issues that you see or hear potentially could happen with Huawei as an example. Which, is a lot of that speculation. I don't necessarily agree with the amount of beatings that they've been given, but the truth of the matter is that once your equipment's been compromised at layer 2, if you're a complete cage solution and you're doing layer 1 all the way through, then your entire network's compromised. Whereas if you build your network at layer 1 and then layer your layer 2 and above on top of that, then your network is never going to be compromised if your equipment's compromised at the higher levels. So that's, from a security standpoint, the purity of layer 1 is something that gives it an inherent, much stronger, much more secure backbone. And of course, you don't have to replace your layer 1 every time you replace your layer 2 because you've got Cisco equipment. Sorry, won't name vendors, but you've got a layer 2 vendor whose equipment might need to be upgraded every 5 years. Now you're upgrading your layer 1 at the same time, which may, especially on a sort of a passive network, not need upgrading. It might be happy going 10 years, 15 years, you don't know, depending on whose equipment you're using. So you've also got network independence when you just layer 1 for your fiber optic and layer 2 and above for everything else. And network independence is something that's critical when you're, you don't want to be stuck to a vendor. We don't want our customers to be stuck to us for every single aspect. That's why we focus purely on one area to make sure that our customers have network independence as well. So that,
Okay.
yeah, this is just a little bit more of a backbone, not backbone, sort of background on why we believe in just being layer one.
I mean, what's difficult for me, what I'm trying to grasp is any type of disruption at layer one has a dramatic impact, especially now with higher speeds hitting up to 800 gigabits
Yes.
per second. I mean, that's a killer situation for if you're operating a modern cloud or a private data center. You have interconnects, especially with respect to business continuity and disaster recovery. That's something I'm trying to understand. So I do want to speak to you folks about that specific aspect and how you folks have designed your solutions to minimize those type of catastrophic impacts.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and this, yeah, and this really does come down to, a lot of, dare I say personal, but vendor specific, can have their ideas of how things, should really do interact and work. And
Right.
we'll take that one offline because it's opinion based and there are pros and cons of every form of
Sure.
of designing a network.
No problem.
Sure. Absolutely. For me, it comes down to if I'm investing any type of capex and there'll be some operational expense along with it, I expect this to work flawlessly. Now, and I've designed systems in the past where they have to work flawlessly, and you can make it work flawlessly. It's very difficult, but it's not impossible. And for me, this next phase, it's about picking specific vendors that can make certain things become a reality at a very low cost point. So, and I think you folks are definitely one of those vendors.
I won't say we're the lowest cost vendor out there, but
I meant the end service I'm offering to clients.
Oh,
it has to be a competitive low cost. I have no issue paying for excellent quality product. At the end of the day, that's critical.
That's all Gavin's deal of being the salesman. Why our Ford is better than their Chevy or whatever it is,
Yeah.
Yes, sure.
My background's actually technical to begin with. I started off as a programmer, and then I got into building networks because I wanted to travel, and I figured that AT&T would pay me to travel, and I was right. So I started as a network engineer, crawling underneath the floorboards, climbing up poles and stuff like that, and worked my way through just about every aspect of the telco industry. And back in the days when we were building networks across Europe, Northern Africa, Middle East, etc., we had one thing that was drilled into our brains over and over and over again by head office, which was that the network will not fail. The network will not ever fail. No matter what you have to do, that network will not fail. And what was interesting...
Maybe somebody should have told Cisco that. No, I've never used Cisco equipment ever since I started this business in '85. It just wasn't reliable. Brought in the lab, stuff fall apart. But the marketing is brilliant, bar none. They are the best technological marketing organization in the world. Phenomenal.
It certainly became in the early '90s a heavily marketing engine. It stepped away from technical more into marketing. I actually recall getting our first Cisco equipment in AT&T, and it was mind-blowing that this small device could do what a giant cabinet was doing standing behind me. And I was very proficient with the screwdriver because that cabinet needed a lot of screws undone just to take out one line card.
Oh my goodness.
It's interesting when I came. When I met actually XKL in the first place, I met with one of the team members who I'd known from other events in the past, and he started explaining the mantra of XKL and the owner of XKL's mantra, which is the network should never fail as well. It's like, wow, I haven't heard that in such a long time, but that's exactly what was drilled into my head when I was building networks, and this is what's drilled into the heads of everyone in the company, which is the network should never fail. I
Len
believe
Bozak
that.
left way too early.
Sorry?
Len Bozak left way too early.
Yeah, well, there's maybe he left at the
Honestly,
right time.
XKL, he's done some. To me, it's phenomenal. Like
Yeah.
I'm amazed.
Oh, well, we're happy with it. That's why we stay.
Yeah.
But you know,
They're tough to
there's
compete
certainly.
against.
Sorry?
You're very difficult to compete against. I can see that in your product.
Oh,
Thank you. Are we paying you for this?
No, I've been in this industry too long developing products, and I can pretty
Yeah.
well, just through experience, you can pretty well read when if the product is sort of it is hitting its target market, and operationally it functions according to what's in the specifications sheet. There's a lot of I'll be polite. They're not very good vendors out there that the marketing looks great, the execution sucks bad. I'll be blunt. Been there too many times. So companies like yourselves, I don't know who else, Pluribus Networks, higher up, done a good job, great job. And I need to put together those pieces to be competitive in a very tough environment in the future. So
we try.
So this is a company where, like, I don't know what the layer one, but I know you guys have it. Anyway, thank you very much. It was a great presentation.
No problem.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions or anything to add as well?
Now, and the big thing is for us is getting the feedback from you guys. Is, you know, we love doing this sort of thing and making, you know, making connections with different people and helping helping our customers and others that we work with, not just the customers, but even just people who may not be buying our stuff, but do come to us for advice. Are there any other subjects or things that you'd be interested at a later date, possibly of doing a deeper dive into a specific function? You know, trying to do a global broad spectrum look at optical networking, you know, it takes a little bit of time and can be hard, but obviously Ron will talk to you about a future possibly one-on-one session, but if anyone else wants any global sessions discussing, I don't know, the optics available out there and the types of optics and why and things. I mean, that's one subject we've been thinking about. You know, there's plenty of options, but you know, if anyone's got anything and wants to know, then please let us know, and we'd love to organize something. And again, try not to be silly about it from our perspective, but just try to be more educational and help people with their optical networking needs.
Also, if anybody has anything that they'd like to present with regards to what they're doing with their networks, their projects, that would be absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
We did try to keep this to roughly an hour in length, and we don't want to expend anyone's time either. So we're just over an hour and 17 minutes, I guess. So if anyone does have any questions, please, you know, feel free to jump in now. If not, we can wrap up and sort of start putting together the next one. We've sort of decided to try and run these every 2 weeks. So we won't have a session next week, but the week after we'll have a session. And we'll base it on some of the other questions that have been sent through independently as well, which there are not that many of right now. So we definitely appreciate some more feedback. I've also got a list of people who wanted to join the call today, but couldn't for various different reasons, including some of our European colleagues who are network providers, network operators. So it'd be nice to have those guys on board next week as well, and we can have a more diverse discussion. And this is what we'd really like to do, is make the conversation more diverse and less sort of centric to us, and just keep it sort of open, general, and non-vendor specific. So.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the session, and I'll see everybody in 2 weeks.
We'll talk soon. Thanks.
Sure.
Anybody else? if not, we'll end the meeting at this point. Thank you very much for coming and for attending. Any feedback, please feel free to drop us an email, and we'll talk again soon.